Welcome to Futura Sound's Foxiest of the Decade. I'm your host, Joran. Only one name, like a VJ. We begin with a tie. My favorite PC World War II game of the last 10 years. It's gotta be either Company of Heroes 2 or Men of War 2. Company of Heroes 2 did something that I never thought could work. Historical fiction via real-time tactics. When I had heard that the entire campaign follows the Red Army, being a pretty anti-totalitarian guy myself, I was kind of turned off. But frankly, no modern take that I've seen on the subjects of Stalin or the Russian front in World War II gets it as grippingly as Company of Heroes 2. As a random example, sacrificing scores of men and conducting scorch and burn operations in this game are necessary because they're ordered, even though they serve very little benefit in the grand scheme of things. The game is constantly forcing you to compromise your morality for the sake of fighting an unwinnable battle. The effect that this has through gameplay is really magical. The utter senselessness and mass hysteria of such a valorized war has rarely been so starkly depicted, let alone done so through interaction. Still, glad the Nazis lost. Men of War, meanwhile, just has an amazing core concept that I couldn't believe doesn't get more consistently ripped off. It's simply put the ultimate World War II sandbox game, with a strong emphasis on tactics and survival. The game's incredibly difficult, and a tactical approach is just the beginning. It takes also great patience, planning, and skill just to even get comfortable in this game, which, by the way, I never have. But I still love playing Men of War anytime I have some spare time, even when I'm constantly screwing up. Typically, World War II games are all about staged set pieces and doing something exactly according to order. This game throws a lot of that out of the window in favor of emergent, non-linear gameplay, which is just awesome. Next up, Catherine. It's important for games to try new ideas and express culture. Catherine, right or wrong, accomplishes both goals stupendously. And like all my favorite games, Catherine's both a quality gameplay experience and, for its time, a relatively new sort of story for the medium. Even if it can be a little juvenile at parts, I like Catherine at least tries to put love, adulthood, and relationships in its crosshairs, rather than just being a kick-ass esport without a genre.
Right, I got it. Right, I got it.
Also on my list is Persona 5. I like George Orwell. I like Lupin III's Castle of Cagliostro. Finally, I like cats, Batman, and punching Nazis. Do I really have to say more? Yes, I do, because my favorite thing about Persona 5 is how ultimately it turns against you yourself, the player, a bit, to make its point about how it's not always as simple as finding a bad guy and fixing his or her or their mind. To want to do that past a point can itself become a corruption that needs rectifying. Also, Morgana is everything. Next. Nier Automata. Rules. That's not the title, that's just my opinion. Did you really need me to say it? I mean, just look at it. It's probably as great of a sci-fi game as Death Stranding. And damn, Nier Automata has the single best Square Enix soundtrack for my money since Final Fantasy VII. Nier Automata's a wonderful case of form-matching content. Little gameplay quirks work off the narrative or themes beautifully. And the game is really experimental with even the basic concept of a game ending. There are a bonkers number of different ways for the game to go on after the credits and to end. That's all before even mentioning the involvement of Platinum Games, who make the best hack and slash titles around, and who really contrast well with the cerebral science fiction and philosophical themes with some nice, hardcore, down-to-earth action gameplay. Next up, we have Telltale's Walking Dead, Season 1. What can I say? It was great. It was a new concept that drew on universals from all adventure game genres in a way that seemed to finally unlock that genre for a wider audience. I'll never forget Lee or Clem, two of the best characters that I've seen in a game for a very long time. Next, we have Deadly Premonition. Sometimes a game just comes along and hits you with an 18-wheeler's worth of what the fuck. This is that kind of game. Sure, the Lynch impression's not great, but when you actually play Deadly Premonition, you realize that you wouldn't want it to be any other way. Deadly Prem uses David Lynch and movies like Silence of the Lambs to lure you in, but really it's more like an open-world LA noir, with elements derived from a less action-heavy Resident Evil 4 and a less slice-of-life-heavy Shenmue. It ends up a kind of bizarre, sideways satire/love letter to everything from Silent Hill to the films of John Landis. A truly heartwarming, if not occasionally genuinely creepy, very dark, but always kooky, director-driven Japanese game. But where there is no light at all, I think, anyway, without looking into it, without a Google, is space. Which brings us to Mass Effect 2. A truly amazing masterpiece of science fiction. Mass Effect 2 was the final BioWare game, and no, we aren't going to talk about that any further. Next up, rounding out my list, are my two favorite CRPGs of the last decade, Divinity Original Sin 2 and Disco Elysium. Divinity 2 is the single greatest couch co-op game of all time. It also might be the greatest D&D inspired game since Baldur's Gate 2 or Dragon Age Origins. And finally, Disco Elysium is just the best. For a full-length review, check the link in this video's description. Well, that about does it, you guys. Happy New Year, and until next time, boss.
I'll turn you nice and red.